all plays with English surtitles, Berlin's post-migrant theatre and the capital city's shifting language hierarchies. All plays with English surtitles. This is the text displayed on the door of one of the theatre spaces used by the Maxim Gorki Theatre in Berlin. With this sign, I want to invite you to explore with me glossodiversity, that is, the diversity of languages, and semiodiversity, that is, the diversity of meanings, in the context of the shifting language preferences and language hierarchies in Berlin, Germany. I propose that theatre, as a self-reflexive art form, lends itself to exploring the interplay between language, power, and values. Theatre reflects and contributes to shaping how a culturally diverse society defines itself and its values, including through choosing and playing with languages. First, I will provide a historical context and contemporary assessment of German as the main language spoken on stage. Secondly, I will consider the increasing importance of English as a supertitling language in multilingual theatre performances and as a lingua franca in the rehearsal room. Throughout my paper, we will return to the Gorki Theatre to get engaged with a case study that illustrates how the recent linguistic and cultural shifts decenter German as the sole language traditionally used on stage, and how they affect other languages and existing language hierarchies. In the end, I will open up my analysis to a question with broader implications. That is, how do the different ways in which we value languages relate to their functions and expressive power when used for specific purposes in multilingual and culturally diverse environments? In short, my paper will explore questions of value in the context of power, access, and potential artistic value. First, some background information to refresh your memory. Germany, a country with 83.1 million people, uses German as its official language, here in yellow. German has not been defined as its national language in its constitution. According to the 2019 migration report, people with a so-called migration background make up 26% of its population. In Berlin, it is about a third of the population. In addition to German, Russian and Turkish are the most frequently spoken in Germany. At school, Standard German is taught. English dominates as the first foreign language taught in schools, followed by French, Latin, Spanish, Russian, and others. In Germany, the theatre continues to enjoy a high standing, especially when compared to many other countries. This esteem has contributed to German theatres and orchestras' addition to the National UNESCO list of Intangible Cultural Heritage in 2014. Currently, Germany supports 142 publicly funded theatres. My focus in this paper is on these institutions because, without being prescriptive, this funding is associated with a brief to reflect and contribute to shaping how the German society defines itself in the present. In its increasingly culturally diverse society, this has resulted in a stronger interest in staging multilingual theatre productions, particularly in recent times. For this reason, German-spoken theatre provides an interesting case study for analyzing how language choice and language use on the stage and in supertitles are deeply linked to the cultural politics in linguistically diverse metropolitan societies, such as Berlin. On the one hand, the city actively uses this trait to brand itself and the cultural experiences it offers. As you can see, its glossodiversity, in the sense of referring to multiple languages, has been also used in the recent election campaign. On the other hand, Berlin, as well as in other metropolises, everyday multilingualism has often not been embraced by the local cultural institutions, including its urban theatres. This situation already highlights that language does not serve as a neutral vehicle for communication, nor is it a transparent creative tool. Against this background, the Maxim Gorki Theatre, a small award-winning theatre located just off the touristy Unter den Linden Avenue, has played a pioneering role in breaking the dominance of the German language on the mainstream Berlin stage. As one of 4 publicly funded theatres in Berlin, this municipal theatre or Stadttheater can be considered as representative of Germany's comparatively well-subsidized theatre scene. For example, it is able to operate with a dedicated ensemble and to show a repertoire of works. The Gorki values glossodiversity as part of its engagement with Berlin's increasingly linguistically and culturally diverse population. The theatre also features diverse multilingual cast and audiences due to the voluntary or forced mobility of its actors and spectators. In 2019, the German theatre magazine Theater Heute has recognized the Gorki in its retrospective of remarkable theatre of the last decade. It has recognized it for its clear engagement with the lines of conflict and changing values in a diverse metropolis, acknowledging its pioneering role in showing fresh perspectives from the point of view of post-migrant and queer communities, as well as other minorities on its stage, thus paving the way for a similar engagement by theatres in other German metropolises. Rather than sidelining these diverse voices as minor, the Gorki's transformation has sought to implement diversity in multifaceted ways throughout the institution that go beyond mere tokenism. It is noteworthy that currently the Gorki's language policy and practice contrast with that of most mainstream publicly funded theatres, where German continues to be the dominant language on the spoken theatre stage, largely for historical reasons. As David Gremling in The Invention of Monolingualism, Yasmin Yildiz in Beyond the Mother Tongue, and others have shown, a so-called monolingual paradigm had established itself at the latest around 1800. Till Dembeck refers to the emergence of the mother tongue as, quote, an unlikely synthesis of vernacular and the language of education with a unifying factor, unquote. Theatre is part of a system that has tended to align a single language, culture, cultural identity, and nationhood. This system is reflected in narratives of the German Kulturnation, cultural nation, in which a monolingualized German language and theatre became part of the building blocks of a unified nation, and where intellectuals and aristocrats sought to engender national consciousness for at least 2 centuries before the 1871 unification, working to represent through performance a German, in inverted commas, language, ethnicity, culture, character, myth, and especially history, that is Cornish. As a result, quote, German theatre is located far more than in other countries at the very heart of the nation's self-understanding, according to Böhnisch. The role of the German Stadttheater, consisting of representing a largely homogeneous German culture, had repercussions for cultural policies, including theatre's approach to casting and multilingualism. Ingrid Gogolin's term monolingual habitus, originally coined in the late 90s for the education sector, also captures that in German theatres it has been assumed for a long time, quote, that monolingualism is the one and only normality, unquote. That's Gogolin. At the Gorki, the range of languages spoken in the theatre have expanded since Sherman Langhoff and Jens Hillner took on its directorship in 2013. In a range of productions, it has also exposed audiences to scenes that destabilize, quote, the assumed transparency of language as a passive medium for the transmission of meaning, according to Gilbert and Tompkins, highlighting instead the indeterminacy, ambivalence, and unfamiliarity that accompanies any language use, including in the multifaceted communication processes taking place in theatre performances. The Gorki's linguistically and culturally diverse program is currently overseen by Sherman Langhoff as artistic director and a diverse artistic advisory board. They collaborate with a multilingual group of people working on and behind the stage and a large network of artists and political activists. Together with this team, Langhoff continues to build on her long-term engagement with fostering what she refers to as post-migrant theatre, a theater that represents the stories and perspective of those who themselves have not migrated, but who have this migration background as part of their personal knowledge and collective memory. Originally coined around 2008, the term postmigrant could have been more recently completed by migrant theatre due to the arrival of large numbers of migrants in Germany around 2015, some of whom have joined the Gorki's ensemble and audiences since. Throughout her career, Langhoff has continued to challenge hegemonic theatre and performance practices. Similarly, her former co-director Hilje received in 2019 the Venice Biennale Golden Lion for lifetime achievement in theatre, for his substantial contribution to, quote, the creation of a new audience from different social backgrounds and geographical areas, unquote. The Gorki's team's nurturing of diversity has encompassed a sustained featuring of languages rarely heard on German stages before, extending its glossodiversity to include and move beyond languages spoken by large migrant groups. And I'll let you read these yourself. The situation. The Gorki's resident director Jarl Ronnin's 2015 production The Situation illustrates how the theatre contributes to decentering German as the dominant language on stage. The award-winning play adopts the frame of a language classroom as a common scenario and metaphor for depicting immigrants who try to familiarize themselves with an unfamiliar language and culture. Developed together with a cast that included 5 recent newcomers to Berlin, the play uses some German, together with many passages in English and some Arabic, Hebrew and Russian. The play takes its title from the term situation being applied as a deliberately vague political reference used by people discussing the conflict in Israel-Palestine in Hebrew or Arabic. It mixes the personal and the political. When the adult Israeli, Arab, Palestinian and Syrian characters are testing out their German skills, this triggers a series of frequently comic exchanges and semi-autobiographical monologues that allow Ronnin to address sensitive topics and political conflicts. Absurd humor, occasionally reminiscent of Ionesco, marks the interactions between teacher Stefan and his students, where for language practice purposes, Stefan asks for information he already knows, such as a participant's name. This suspension of communicative and social convention appears to be supported by the classroom scenario, so that Stefan can pose a series of teacher questions that could otherwise be considered unacceptable due to their private nature or sensitivity. In their introductory German course in the diverse suburb of Berlin-Neukölln, the characters progress through 7 lessons of increasing grammatical complexity. It soon becomes clear that the grammar structures and progressive acquisition of language skills are serving as a tool, allowing the author and performers to engage with questions of cultural identity. For example, the question, Wer bist du? Who are you? In Lektion 1, Lesson 1, is used to explore notions of origin, fluid identities, and multiple belonging. Due to the language classroom setting, the German language is initially at the center of the dialogues on stage. However, as the play progresses, the language is used less frequently. While dominant in Lesson 1, large parts of the later scenes feature dialogues in English, and in the last lesson, it contains statements by the language students that are mainly expressed in Arabic, together with some Hebrew. The value of German as the so-called target language also diminishes as the play develops. Initially, German is the language held in high esteem, resulting in a teacher-student power imbalance that is reinforced by Stefan's great eagerness to encourage his students to create grammatically and semiotically correct sentences, despite their limited linguistic repertoire. This power relationship is challenged in later scenes, because many characters aptly use translanguaging and nonverbal strategies to express their complex opinions and experiences, while Stefan increasingly struggles to verbally circumnavigate in German the cultural sensitivities that exist in his culturally diverse classroom. Multilingualism and translanguaging are thus presented as highly valuable tools of empowerment for successfully conducting cross-cultural negotiations. Almost the entire play is supertitled in English and, where appropriate, in German, so that German and English-speaking audiences can at least partially compensate for their potential lack of fluency in Arabic and Hebrew. The play and its production met with strong critical acclaim, evident, for example, in an invitation to the 2016 Berliner Theatertreffen and to the prestigious Forum of Contemporary German Language Drama, the Mülheimer Theatertage. Say it in English. When Stefan struggles to adequately phrase a sensitive question in simple German, one of the other characters suggests to him to say it in English. The teacher switch in the language spoken on stage reflects a broader linguistic phenomenon in Germany's urban centers, where the use of Englishes has increased in multiple ways. In Berlin's main publicly funded theaters, this growth manifests itself in the rise of supertitles, providing interlingual translation in English. Thus, the Gorki has supported the wide range of languages spoken on its stage through supertitles for all of its 96 productions between its 2013 and 2020 season. The dominant language of its interlingual supertitles has been English. A similar effort is made by other Berlin theaters with an international outlook, such as the Schaubühne am Lehniner Platz. The Schaubühne has provided the greatest number of captions in English, followed by the provision of French translations, which have been made available in supertitles for a third to half of all recent productions. These two examples represent a broader trend. In Berlin's publicly funded theaters, English features as the preferred language of choice for interlingual supertitles that rely on what Lawrence Venuti has labeled domesticated translations, aiming to support communication that is immediately intelligible despite its condensed nature. While providing an additional language through supertitles has the overall benefit that it generally broadens linguistic access to shows, it is surprising that so many Berlin theaters tend to support the powerful position of a language that continues its colonial legacy, in that it tends to be spoken and understood in international contexts by people with a privileged education. As Emily Farrell has pointed out, this privilege is heightened further by the marketable hype of Berlin as an artistic space where English, quote, serves as a way into the art world, into the community, but also into privileged art job opportunities, with the push of English even extending to people who share German as the first language, unquote. In Berlin's language ecology, the preference for English simultaneously marginalizes languages such as Turkish and Arabic that are highly important in the local linguistic landscape and could lend themselves to audience development initiatives through removing linguistic barriers for people who may wish to attend the theater as part of their human right to access, participate in, and enjoy culture, cultural heritage, and cultural expression. In Berlin's theater scene, the fraught dynamics of intercultural exchange that Rustam Barucha has repeatedly pointed out are particularly visible in the frequent absence of supertitles in originally diasporic languages on stage, affecting theater makers and audiences alike. Language barriers not only restrict artists' mobility, they also can be one of several factors that contribute to deterring potential theater goers from exploring the programs of local municipal theaters, especially if these potential audience members have been marginalized in multiple ways. However, as Alison Phipps reminds us, Western democracies, and I would add Western cultures, quote, have remained radically impervious to the languages which have not been part of colonial projects, unquote. With respect to supertitles, it seems as though the decentering of German as the main spoken language on stage currently tends to reinforce linguistic power imbalances through favoring another privileged, hypercentral language for interlingual supertitles. While recently developed technologies such as smart caption glasses could challenge the monopoly of English through offering multiple language options for translations, these are currently not readily available, So for the time being, the majority of Berlin's publicly funded theaters tend to support Berlin's local language hierarchies and its alignment of language value with the status of a particular language. Limited English. In addition to the English used for interlingual supertitles, whose communicative effectiveness relies on the actor's spoken text having been condensed into succinct 1- or 2-line cues, there's also a kind of globalized English that is frequently used in contemporary rehearsal rooms. Here, English is often the only shared language in an artistic context with great glossodiversity that may also rely on translators and translation tools. This English as lingua franca is frequently also marked by a reduced complexity, but in different ways and for different purposes than the English used for supertitles, in that it may decrease its syntactic and lexical complexity to ensure theatre makers' mutual intelligibility. As Yael Ronen stated in a recent panel discussion, it is, quote, a limited language. And she added, an English that would never be used as it is on the stage of an English-speaking country. Yet this reduction of linguistic complexity does not necessarily need to restrict the creative value of a play that has been created in collaboration with the multilingual actors on stage. On the contrary, as Ronen's various dialogues in the situation show, the limited linguistic repertoire in German and English can be used highly effectively through applying the creative strategy of constraint. To give just one example, Ronen repeatedly uncovers that which has become unspeakable, for example due to taboo or trauma, through shifting the meaning of idiomatic expressions by using literal translations in the text. In the following quote, she translates the English adjective determined with the German determiniert, that is potentially a false friend because of its concurrent association with predetermination. The more suitable word in German would be fest entschlossen. As it is obvious to the audience that Stefan has been trying hard to avoid any linguistic pitfalls and any mention of the Shoah when talking in symbol language about the past, the meaning of determiniert in Noah's assessment of Stefan's language class begins to oscillate. She confirms tongue-in-cheek, alles in Ordnung, super, saugeil. Wir haben viel Respekt vor deiner Kultur und schöne deutsche Sprache. Und wir sind ganz determiniert, es zu sprechen. Sprachen. Difficult to repeat the mistake. This semi-diversity in German, also evident in the mixing of language registers, is matched by the polysemy that results from Ronen applying her poetics of constraints to the limited English. For example, there is a tension between Stefan's attempt to deliver politically correct language lessons and his lack of linguistic sophistication when he tells Hamoudi, a recent migrant from Syria, I want to integrate you. In the German context of many language classes for migrants being embedded into so-called integration courses, Stefan's statement suggests an exaggerated eagerness to be good and to receive approval for this action. In Hamoudi's response, Ronen cleverly endows him with an agency that results from a disarming linguistic simplicity. Hamoudi simply counters Stefan's vague question, I ask myself, what can I do? Meaning about the terrible situation in Syria that he's been describing, by asking, yes, what can you do? Throughout the play, Ronen illustrates how a poetics of constraint can create a surplus of meanings, where the clever use of a single word or idiomatic expression generates new associations and metaphors that provide fresh perspectives on how we conceptualize and represent intercultural encounters. The playwright strategically appropriates the German and English languages, making rich use of what appear to be limited linguistic resources to humorously challenge existing meanings, power structures, and memories. This strategy could also challenge how we attribute value to languages and their use. The examples of various Englishes and Germans in this paper have shown that their value needs to be determined keeping in mind their function and expressive power when used for specific purposes in multilingual and culturally diverse environments. Last but not least, this nuanced approach to multilingualism also implies a need to preserve a range of speaking and writing styles. With respect to the German theatre, the challenge consists of decentering both the so-called High German and English as exclusive performance and supertitling languages on stage, and of maintaining semiodiversity while actively encouraging glossodiversity. Thank you.